The gentleman yields back. I appreciate all of our witnesses being here today. I think what we heard is the need to pass the ACE Act. Time and again, we heard the challenges we face in Washington, D.C. and across the country for lax voter integrity laws and an opportunity to strengthen voter integrity. We had testimony from our witnesses about the implications that strong voter integrity provisions have. We highlighted Florida, we highlighted Georgia. We reviewed the rhetoric from last year from the left, from President Biden and others, who called the Georgia voter integrity law, Jim Crow 2.0, a whole host of flawed arguments. And then the empirical data came forward and actually showed that by putting in place strong voter integrity provisions, what we actually got was higher participation and more people appreciating the process. It's my firm belief that when you have strong voter integrity provisions, what you actually do is enhance people's confidence in their elections. And when confidence is enhanced, more people are likely to vote. And I think there's some real common sense provisions that we put in this, in particular as it relates to Washington, D.C. We talked about how you need a photo ID to buy a six-pack of beer if you're a resident of D.C., to board an airplane. We heard people talk about their Second Amendment rights and the need for a photo ID there. So it's completely rational to think that putting forward photo ID for the right to vote actually enhances confidence in our elections. It was brought up again by my colleague about the impact of non-citizens voting. Mr. Ranking Member, you noted that you'd be happy to make sure that Russian and Chinese agents that are hostile to the United States interests aren't able to vote. I'd ask you to take a hard look at the ACE Act and consider supporting it, because what it does is it prevents Chinese and Russian agents from being able to vote in Washington, D.C. I think that's a pretty common sense thing. I think it's absolutely ridiculous to think that somebody who works on the embassy staff of a foreign country is going to pull out a foreign passport and walk up and vote in a Washington, D.C. election because they've been in the nation's capital for 30 days. There's an estimated 20 to 40,000 individuals who are 18 years of age, who've been in D.C. for 30 days, who are citizens of another country. A healthy chunk of them working for foreign countries while being here in the nation's capital. I think it's pretty reasonable to make sure that those individuals aren't voting. We know that in Washington, D.C., in the 2022 election, 500 ballots were sent out that were incorrect. Well, it sure gives you a lot of pause when you realize that in addition to that, we have voter rolls in Washington, D.C. that are not as up to date as they could be. So it's rational to think that if you have non-citizens voting, that all sorts of things could go on, and individuals who are on the voter rolls could find themselves able to vote in a federal election, which is ridiculous. The ACE Act provides the tools for Washington, D.C. to be able to prevent that. We stopped the sending of unsolicited ballots. We talked about the implications that that's had in Washington, D.C., where multiple ballots were sent in previous elections unsolicited by people on an unmaintained voter list. Those types of things don't enhance people's confidence in our elections. The ACE Act resolves that. In our hearing opened with a comment from one of my colleagues that was disappointed we were even here having this conversation in the first place. If the cameras were flipped around and saw the attendance in this room, I'd suggest that it's a great idea to be having this conversation. We've got a lot of people here who are interested in this. Instead of H.R. 1, which was shoved through with no amendments, 2 quick hearings, a federal takeover of our election law, what we've done, starting before the 2020 election, began building this legislation so that we are in a position to discuss it, to amend it, to make it as strong as we can, and ultimately to pass it, to have the most substantive and strongest election integrity bill pass the House of Representatives in over 20 years. With that, I'll yield to myself and say and thank all of our witnesses for being here today. Appreciate your testimony. Appreciate the ranking member for working with me in this. And each member of the committee may have some additional questions for our witnesses. We ask that you please respond in writing to those questions. Without objection, each member will have 5 legislative days to insert additional material into the record or to revise and extend their remarks. Now, pursuant to paragraph C of House Rule 14 of the Committee on House Administration, I hereby appoint William Johnson assistant clerk of the committee, and I'll request unanimous consent that the letter appointing the assistant clerk be entered into the official record. A copy of the letter will be made available to all members of the committee. And if there's no further business, I think—
Mr. Chairman, could I just ask unanimous consent to enter 2 documents into the record?
The documents are?
A study by Professor Charles Stewart in the MIT Election Data and Science Lab on how we voted in 2022, discussing confidence going up in our elections, and a letter from Common Cause about how more secret dark money would be allowed in our elections under the legislation.
Without objection.
Thank you.